It's my honor to present with John Mahoney, who's become a really good friend and who is just an absolute treasure at Boston College. John and I were asked to contribute essays, as Karen alluded to the newest edition of the C21 magazine, which addresses the importance of liberal arts. And I want to quote from Elizabeth Shalala, our guest editor and associate dean in the Morrissey College. In the opening essay of the issue, Elizabeth writes, "Market-driven forces are circling their wagons around higher ed in the United States," and she poses crucial questions. Could an industry-driven knowledge core harvested by artificial intelligence eliminate the need for human beings to develop reading, writing, and critical thinking skills? And might robots and 3D holograms replace the faculty at some point? What might be the result? Before we grapple with these looming questions, it might make sense to reflect for a few minutes on how liberal arts education has evolved at Boston College. There's no better person to speak to this than John Mahoney. John, as an undergraduate at BC in the late 1970s, could you share some reflections on the core curriculum and liberal arts and how they impacted you at that time?
Sure. Sometimes it helps to be the senior statesman, I guess. It does go back that far. I'm a proud graduate of the class of 1979 at Boston College. And I experienced the core curriculum at that time through the honors program, which existed at that time. And I fulfilled my requirements in English, philosophy, theology, and the social sciences over the course of 2 years with one double-weighted course that was taught by two different honors program professors. And I would say to you that experience represented for me an intellectual awakening. It was so different from what I had experienced in high school. I went to a local public high school, quite strong high school, where I had been challenged, certainly, and done well. But the experience that I had in this honors program was remarkable. First of all, there were a grand total of 15 students in my seminar section. All of the sections were restricted to that. There was a ton of reading to be doing. We were constantly trying to keep up because the class, while it had papers, there was really no final exam. Everything was pretty much, your grade was pretty much predicated on your class participation. So you had some really bright students engaging with these remarkable texts, from beginning with the Hebrew Bible and moving through the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle, medieval times, Renaissance, Enlightenment, right up to modern times through that 2-year sequence. So it was a remarkable experience. It was a great books course for all intents and purposes. It was what my good old friend Mark O'Connor called the opportunity to engage in the great conversation. And it really was. I had Professor Albert Foucard in my first year, and I had a guy named Professor Joe Check in the second year. And it was certainly, they pretty much just tossed the questions out into the floor, and then you just had this remarkable conversation about the great books. And it was uplifting. It raised my consciousness in so many ways. And, we toss around a term these days, lifelong learner. There's lots of lifelong learners. I would say that my education back then, before that term had been coined, I became a lifelong learner right there because we were moving so quickly through all of these texts. I realized all the things that I was missing and that I would need to supplement on my own, like the following summer. I remember in one example for me was my first exposure to Albert Camus, The Fall, which rocked me. I'd never read anything like that, and I resolved, I've got to find The Stranger, I've got to find the play, I've got to read everything by this guy. But it really made me a lifelong learner in the best sense of the word. I also had, as part of my core curriculum, course in fine arts. Actually, it's 2 semesters. I can't remember if the Corps required 2 semesters at that time, but I took 2 semesters. I really had no experience with art whatsoever, but I learned so much. And I look at myself today and I ask, why is it that I have a membership at the Museum of Fine Arts and at the Whitney in New York, which I don't even get down to every year? It's because of what started right here, this sense of wanting to know, wanting to get better. And I think, I think that kind of an education really creates that kind of hunger in you. And that's what it should be doing at that time. I would say something to keep in mind. Yes, I'm saying great things about the education, the teaching, the learning. Boston College in the late 1970s was not the Boston College of today in a lot of ways. Most importantly, in the early 70s, it was a place that was facing significant financial headwinds until one J. Donald Mahoney, Father Mahoney, whose portrait is right over there, he arrived in 1972, and he had a lot of issues to address. So I think while we're talking about liberal arts education, really sort of in the context of student formation, which is so well defined today, there really weren't those kinds of parallel student formation programs at the time. The learning happened in the classroom. And I think this was largely due to financial pressures. I mean, that takes what we have today takes resources, and those resources weren't there. Father Mahoney was in the business of saving Boston College and setting it on solid financial footing. And so we lacked those kinds of student formation programs. That said, in the coursework that we were doing, we were reading theology. So we certainly were exposed to St. Thomas Aquinas and the importance of reason and faith leading to understanding, and studying Ignatius as well. Those topics came up. But the exchange happened in the classroom, which was great, but it would have been great if we had that machinery, if you will, that apparatus that we've got today, where students can take what they're learning beyond the classroom and engage in those the kinds of programs that exist today. That said, when we were doing one of our prep sessions, Karen talked about the fact that at her graduation, she remembered distinctly Father Mahoney speaking to the graduates and saying that if your education hasn't changed you during these past 4 years, then we haven't done our job. Well, my education changed me. And the change began predominantly with the power, the value, the critical importance of a liberal arts education. What it taught me in terms of being able to read critically, think analytically, solve problems, but most importantly, as I said to countless audiences throughout the course of my career, to become an effective communicator with the written word and the spoken word. Those are 2 skills that never go out of fashion, and they come from, I believe, a rigorous liberal arts education. And those skills I really had ingrained during my 4 years at BC, but in particular during that 2-year honors program sequence.
So interesting.
Tom, you're not going to get away alone. I get off easy here. In your essay in the magazine, you write about the value proposition of liberal arts education from the perspective of a BC alumnus, of a parent, and a faculty member. Could you walk us through those various perspectives and share some insights with us?
Sure. And so I was introduced to Jesuit education in high school, and one of my high school teachers is here, by the way, Father Don. Everyone say hello to Father Don. All right. And I heard expressions when I was 14 years old, and these continued when I came to BC. We had a lot of Jesuits then. We had many more Jesuits teaching when I was at Boston College than we do now. And right away, early on, I heard expressions from Jesuits such as, discipline is love in disguise. And they had this program called JUG at my high school called Justice Under God. It was like detention. And I hope Father Don doesn't remember giving me one because I'm speaking. But I don't think he did. But we had Jesuits that confronted us with big questions, And they said, if you don't take yourself seriously, then no one else will. And why wait till you're 30 to take yourself seriously? You're here to learn how to read and write and to be good people, you know? And so these big picture questions came to us. And so I knew these Jesuits and these Ignatian colleagues, these teachers at Jesuit schools were about the business of important work. And so I started to maybe dream big, dream bigger than I would have had I not been exposed to Ignatian pedagogy at a young age. And so I'm very grateful. Another told us that if we didn't care for our minds, bodies, and souls, we wouldn't amount to much, that we had to think in an integrated way, right? Mind, body, and spirit. You're not just a mind, you're not just a body, you're not just a spirit. And so again, more big picture ideas. And so these ideas about what was possible were nurtured by people that really cared a lot. Then I came to Boston College. It was, Ignatian pedagogy continued, an integration now of the arts and sciences and these beautiful ideas that came from the liberal arts, the great books. I say to our students today, no offense to my School of Management colleagues, but it's the liberal arts that make us interesting people and that make you interesting people. And when we think about the Ratio Studiorum, right, the original program of studies that go back 400 years, we could see up here above, if you have good eyes, over and around the mural, starting at around 9 o'clock, if you turn your head, we would have, Mathematica, Philosophica, Musica, right? The Greek, Historia, right? Rhetorica, rhetoric, Jurisprudentia is at the top. Theologia, right? Religia, religion. These are the classical program of studies and subjects that would make people refined young men and women, right? And so here they are today, 470 years later, and we still are working on our core, and we're still working on our going back to our roots. And so as a young person, these ideas, kindled a sense of enthusiasm in me for what might be possible, and to have people say, to have teachers say, what is your work going to be about, right? Why are you here? Why are you here at BC? Why are you here on Earth? We're going to talk about that this semester, and I want you to come to office hours. We can talk about that. And you can tell me why you think you're here on Earth. Like, seriously, that's a big question. And it's a privilege to be able to be asked something like that. And as John was alluding to, we can say things at Boston College as a Jesuit school that maybe non-sectarian schools would be stretching to say. But these questions are in our wheelhouse. And we know they go to the whole person, right? Whole person education. And so these were great events and moments. And then I became a parent, and a parent of multiple students that would be running around this campus with all of you. And that was a joy as well. Now I could see what my children, my young adult children, were experiencing right in college. And when my wife and I would ask them what's happening at school, they would talk about their classes a little bit, but they would really talk about their service programs, the on-campus activities, when the game was, how are they going to get onto this Kairos list anyway, right? They start signing up for Kairos freshman year. And then, my daughter would come home and she'd be a TA, and my other daughter would be on Kairos, and they'd say, "Dad, do you know what a thin space is?" And I'd say, I've heard of it, but I'm not really up on it because I didn't have Kairos, as John was alluding to. We didn't have the resources as we do today to go to the Connors Family, Retreat Center in Dover, Mass. We didn't have the programming, the co-curricular programming that we do today. And so my kids would tell me about thin spaces, where the distance between heaven and earth is very thin, that you almost have a foot in each place when you go to a special time or have a meaningful retreat. That's beautiful imagery. That's life-changing imagery. So I've really enjoyed that. And it's not just what they learn, which makes them competent, but it's how to think, right? To be critical thinkers. And their teachers, saying at the end of the semester, "I'm going to offer you lifetime office hours." Where else does that work? That's good stuff. And now as a faculty member, I get to see, and really, when I see Jeff and his team and John, Grant, I say, thank you, another great round of admits, because you're giving us the raw material to really kind of work it, and to push students who come ready to play. They come ready, they come prepared, they work really hard, they rise to however high we set the bar, and they want to talk and they want to be engaged. And so John's office and all of the hires he made here are excellent people. They have excellent judgment. That's something else we talk about, How do you develop excellent judgment? We can study the same books, but who's going to have the best judgment? How do you identify talent? And our admission office has identified such talent. It makes teaching a joy, and it makes it easier. And it raises the bar for us, because we know we're going to have to go in and face, 45 of you, because you do the work and you want to be challenged. And so as a faculty member, it's really rewarding. And students want to be asked the great questions, right? Who do you see yourself becoming? Who does the world need you to be? As John alluded to, the Father Himes questions. These are all baked into student formation, and I see formation when I hear the word. I think about it, as you being on a pottery wheel, our students kind of being on that pottery wheel, and all the teachers want to get their hands on that and help mold that, being that's being shaped into something finer and better. You're still in formation. You're thinking about your role in the world, who you're becoming, who you want to be, who you're called to be. So it introduces and invites faith-based discussions, right? What does God want me to be? How do I see God active in my life, and where? And so the integration that John talked about, Father Leahy's push for integration has been really impactful in professional development for faculty to meet students where they are and to keep the promise that you and your team make when you're out on the road. You became director of admissions in 1990. How has the challenge of marketing liberal arts education in a Jesuit Catholic school evolved over that time?
Yeah. So again, using the context of what I've just told you, 1990, Father Mahoney is still president. So I had the wonderful distinction of having served as director of admission under Father Mahoney for 6 years, and then Father Leahy from 1996 through until the present. So two remarkable people, obviously, in Boston College's history. So again, those formation programs weren't fully developed at that point. And so we still had a major challenge, however, because we were marketing a very special kind of education, but an education that, Catholic and Jesuit, if you simply look at American demographics, right, about 25% of the population is Catholic. So that puts a certain onus on you to make sure that you are articulating what Catholic Jesuit education is all about. And I would say at that time, because the student formation piece wasn't fully formed, the real message that we were conveying was Jesuit education as a great example of liberal arts education. This is not a place where you come simply to specialize in one subject area and to prepare for a career. The liberal arts education broadened you, strengthened you in so many ways. And then at the time, I would say what we worked into our presentations most frequently was one of the Jesuit mottos, which is educating men and women for others. And so it was the service piece, I would say, at that time, that was in many ways the best manifestation of Jesuit education, that your education is not yours, it's to be given away. And BC had pretty well developed programs at that time, certainly lots of opportunities within the city of Boston. Appalachia volunteers were around at that time. And so there was a way to certainly talk about this being the kind of education that encouraged you not just to be thinking about yourself, but to be thinking about others, not only during the 4 years that you were here, but also as you go out into the world and you're finding your career path, but to always keep that, if you will, as part of your portfolio. Fast forward to Father Leahy. And in 1996, when he arrived, I can remember I was doing a presentation with him. I was on a panel with him. I think it was somewhere down on lower campus. And he was, as he always was, asking me questions about this very thing. How are we talking about Jesuit Catholic education? Father would push those kinds of things. And I told him this, and he understood. But his response was, yes, but it's about so much more than that. And it was under Father Leahy that I think things really shifted, and that today, and certainly throughout my career, especially toward the end of my career, we really are talking in a much more mature way about student formation. This idea that we welcome students into this university at the age of 18. You might call that the end of adolescence. We let them go at the age of 22, young adulthood. I don't think anybody in this room or anywhere else would challenge me that that's a critical phase in any human being's development. And there's a lot happening during those 4 years. And it's not just intellectual, it's social, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's spiritual. And so BC, under Father Leahy, I give Father Leahy the credit, it was his vision and then the resources that came with that to ensure that there were those opportunities for students to really periodically step back and really think about, who am I? Who am I becoming? What constitutes a good life? What constitutes a good and meaningful life? I would tease students occasionally when I would talk to them, right? What constitutes a good life? Well, 2 homes, 3 cars, and a couple of boats. That's materially a good life, right? But what about a good life that brings you satisfaction and fulfillment and reward? And that the student formation programs that exist today that complement the liberal arts education really ask students to think about those kinds of things. If any of you were at the kickoff event for this series on liberal arts education, you might have heard David Quigley. He said something, I think, very powerful. The origins of Jesuit education in the 16th century, as Ignatius was talking about finding God in all things, was, in David's words, countercultural. We don't recognize that it was countercultural in an age of reason and science and having clearly defined targets for learning. And here's Ignatius talking about finding God in all things. That kind of educational approach really, in many ways, this student formation piece today, which I've described a little bit, a lot of you are probably participating in it, I'm sure, but that student formation is really, in many ways today, very countercultural when you think about higher education, right? I don't know that there are a lot of and BC is very bold about it. We talk about being a leader in formative education. And I think we talk the talk because we can walk the walk. But there are very few admission pitches. I see a couple of my old admissions colleagues over here. Very few admissions pitches out there that talk about these kinds of things. But we could, because the infrastructure was in place, and to really make sure that students were having not only a first-rate education, but also this student formation. And one other point that I would make is that, for an admissions office to simply be marketing first-rate education, my question is, well, so what, right? I mean, if it's an accredited college or university, presumably it should be delivering a solid education to prepare you for whatever you're going to be doing with the rest of your life. So the big question becomes, in Jesuit terms, what's the modus? What's the more? And BC, can point to countless examples around this campus of how students have the opportunity to grow in the classroom, but beyond the classroom, and really think about what kinds of lives they're going to live. So what are the qualities and the characteristics that you observe in our students today that you relate back to their liberal arts training in a Catholic Jesuit institution? In other words, what do you observe that makes a BC education, a BC graduate, so special?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So our students are deeply curious. They're hardworking. They're committed to excellence. They were all in the top, I don't know what percent of their class, but I usually say the top 10%, but that doesn't matter. But they're all around, excellent people. They're well-rounded. The liberal arts shapes us into being well-rounded people. As you were saying, you became the director of admissions, which is in large part data management. It's using Excel to predict the next class. And we can't have too many, right, Jeff? We have to have enough, but we definitely can't have too many. And so they're thinkers like that. They're very curious. I love when they come in and talk about the debates. The past 2 weeks, I've said just in class over the past month, how many of you watched the debates last night? Let me ask it here. How many students watched the debates, the presidential and vice presidential debates? There you go, Exhibit A. Our students are curious. And how many watched them in a group with others and talked about them afterwards? Right? So our students want to have a say in public policy making and in leadership. And so you want to be well informed. You're curious. You're hungry. And it's just a joy to teach here because of who our students are and who they're becoming. I will say I had a funny anecdote recently. A senior came into my office and he was with a freshman male as well, two young men. And I said to the senior, do you have anything, words of wisdom for our freshman companion here? And he said, well, I've consumed enough Kool-Aid here where I'm a believer, And the freshman kind of smiled. And I said to the senior, that implies, Kool-Aid implies that you had no agency and that this is not a choice, that someone kind of spiked your punch and, made you think this way. And he took a minute and said, actually, I do have agency and I do buy in, but it did take a while, because these are big terms. We're after big game in a Jesuit university, and it's not a game, but I say big game because most people don't go there. Most people give up pursuing, big game, but our people don't. And so there is agency. And are you buying, right? There's still a lot of students are in here. Do you believe in the core tenets of a BC education and what drew you here? But these are very important questions. And we hope, as Father Mahoney said at Karen's commencement, if we haven't had an impact on who you're becoming, then we're not doing well. We might be failing, right? And as a Jesuit school, we're only successful based on who our students become. I mean, that's the ultimate criterion for success for Jesuit educators. It's who our students become. So that's a high call all the way around. And we're trying to meet you. We're trying to keep the promise that John and his team makes in the classroom and in the co-curriculars and C21 and all the programming that happens on campus, and to have that virtuous feedback loop happening as it's happening now is mutually reinforcing and validating for all of us, And again, it's a long-term plan. You're all beneficiaries of a lot of investment, a lot of donations, a lot of support and philanthropy to this institution, and continuing promises to keep, the dream, light the flame, and now, ever to excel, and all these beautiful ideas. And now we approach $100,000. We're at $90,000. Given the staggering cost of higher ed that our families are working hard to manage, how would you say families respond to the unique charism Jesuit education at Boston College when you talk about it?
Yeah. So, first off, the cost issue in higher education, that's an issue that is front and center for every college and university in the country, whether it's private or public. There's a reckoning coming because, in my mind, particularly private higher education, it's borderline pricing itself out of the market, and it's really a challenge that every college and university faces. I speak with great pride about my alma mater that we're at a place where we can be need blind in the admission process, and we can guarantee to meet full demonstrated need of every student that comes here. But the fact of the matter is, not every institution in the country can do that. And so it's a serious issue. But to answer Tom's question, I think my response is sort of look around at the world in which we're in. We're about 5 years removed from a deadly pandemic that killed millions of people around the world. We're living in a time where, as Elizabeth's article referenced, the internet, artificial intelligence, these kinds, the allure of the internet and of social media, and the way that young people are being sucked into them, and finding such, in many cases, isolation and depression and anxiety. There are countless examples of this with young people today, partly pandemic related. We still haven't calculated the true cost of the pandemic, but these forces of social media and the internet, which just have enveloped people and really cut them off from quality human involvement, human engagement. Where we're living in a time of terrible political divisiveness. We're living in a time of war in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, all of these things that are out there that young people are dealing with, but that adults are dealing with. And it's, to put it mildly, it's a scary time to be alive. And I think parents see these issues with their children. They see the lure of the internet. They see the lure of social media. They in many cases feel as though they're losing their young people. And then against the backdrop of these world events, these national events, it's all pretty scary. And so I think in that situation, this idea of student formation, this idea of coming to a place where you can not only get a great education, but maybe you can sit in meetings, in sessions, in residence halls, and have conversations, informed conversations with your peers about these issues. And I mean, there's two things I would say that BC does particularly well. It's the student formation piece, and having just retired a year ago in admissions, you know our format. We have students really telling our story from the front of Devlin 110. The staff member just sort of speaks for 10 or 15 minutes to start, but we like students telling the story. And in my years, all I heard from every student was the impact of the questions that Father Michael Himes posed to everybody, right? What are you good at? What brings you joy? And what is the world calling you to do? A place like this, as we're talking about this to prospective students and to their parents, this has got to be seen as just a solace. And people would be thinking, they're talking about the educational process, but they're talking about the modules. What else is offered at this place? So I think that really, for families that are wrestling with the cost, this is something that says, wow, they're doing something more. It might actually be worth it. I also think about around 2014, I think it was, that the academic leadership of this place, David Quigley, Mary Crane, Andy Boynton, they addressed a question that they were concerned about, which was students not engaging with the core curriculum and getting all that they really should be out of their liberal arts education. So what happened? Well, they formed a team and really studied it and came up with something that now is extraordinarily popular here on campus. It's the Core Renewal Program, which is a program that matches two professors from two different disciplines and asks them to frame a course around two themes: complex problems and enduring questions. What a perfect way to encourage students to really see their liberal arts education as meaningful and as valuable. I think that's critically important. So, to answer the question, in terms of the value, the cost, I think there's no question about it. That to see that kind of a holistic experience here is something that is appealing. Mm-hmm. We in the admissions office assure parents and students that they're going to receive a special kind of value here in so many respects. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you personally try to integrate Ignatian pedagogical principles in your classroom.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing that comes to mind around, value and value would be a quantitative measure or metric where we look at it through a business lens, ROI, right? Return on investment, right? And value and what is it? What is special about the charism at Boston College? And I think that we have to look at the long game, right? I mean, the tuition, it's a heavy lift for parents. I meet parents every year at commencement, and sometimes they look at me and say, "Nice to meet you," and I'm tired, right? Your parents have lifted a lot of weight, and they've performed a lot of work and made a lot of payments to Boston College for you to be here. And so I think in thinking about that, the value, and thinking about the classroom, and thinking about, for me, the question has become, over my time here, how will my students know that this material was taught at Boston College? So break it down to just that. What would you say about the course? And how am I explicitly keeping the promise that the admission team makes when they march around the country meeting high schoolers, What's happening in my classroom? And additional resources that support faculty professional development. And we can do a lot of things here. We can go on retreats. We can do sabbaticals. There's so many things faculty have at their resources. If my technology breaks down in class, I can text someone and BC moves heaven and earth to get my PowerPoint up on a screen, because your learning is critical to all of Boston College. Renewal of the core, meetings and committees, and so much thought goes into the creation of even one new course, right? We test things. So many resources go into your educations. One of the programs I was fortunate to go on is called the Ignatian Colleagues Program. Father Leahy maybe invites maybe 2 people every couple of years, maybe 2, maybe 3, to go study about the history of St. Ignatius in Jesuit education. And when I went on that trip, when I took part in that program, there were a bunch of components like a retreat, an 8-day silent retreat, a service trip, an immersion trip, a lot of different things. And we had to do a project. And my project was, we had to kind of stay in our lane for our project. So if someone worked in advancement, their project would be something about raising money related to Ignatian principles, right? Or Ignatian spirituality. So I focused on teaching. And I started to ask myself, how will my students know that this class and this text was taught at Boston College? What makes it distinctive and worthy of a Boston College education? The author of my textbook is here right now, Professor Toomey. Would everyone say hello to Professor Toomey? So I better get this right since I'm talking about the text, right? So I started to look for spaces in the syllabus, right? And to think about how I could ask additional questions, about that relate to discernment and reflection. Because cases in law often give excellent material for discussion. And one particular case that I have taught relates to a poor single mom of 7 children. And she's sort of taken advantage of by this vendor, this furniture company that has her sign a fine print contract. And she signs it and she gets addicted to credit and keeps going back there for other pieces of furniture. And eventually she runs out of gas. She can't make the payments. And they try and repossess all of the furniture because the contract allowed them to do that. And so it goes to court, and the court discusses the efficiency and the legality and the technical rules of a contract being enforceable in law, to protect markets, etc. And I used to teach the case and just move on to the next case. And then as I really started to think deeply about how I could make a case kind of an exemplar for how we can go deeper and really fulfill our promise to students, I started to ask students to write an opinion on that case as if they were the judge. And then I started to add extra questions. For example, if you could have coffee with this woman, what would you ask her and why? What do you want to know? And the same for the furniture company. What do you want to know? And then I added kind of the question that really changed the whole course I would submit without overstating it. I asked students at the end to say, how has your education at Boston College impacted the way you decide that case as a judge? And that's when the door opens. And students start talking about pulse and service learning, right? And living a good life, and Aristotle and Aristotelian justice, right? And John Rawls, behind the veil of ignorance. And I mean, all this amazing stuff comes in that continue to make me a better teacher. And so that would be an example where I try to invite bigger questions that relate to our mission and our purpose about people on the margins, right? And meeting people where you find them, you know, and what would it be like to represent a pro bono client in your busy, successful career, right? How will that make you feel, right? As opposed to just making money. So students hunger for that. They find deep satisfaction in writing these kind of papers, you know, because it lets them say, this is who I am, and this is who I've become during my time at Boston College. And they say to me, I wouldn't have written this freshman year. I would have come down on the efficiency side, right, or the pro-free market side. My pulse placement, my work at Brighton High, or my encountering people on the margins has changed my perspective about what really matters here. And in light of Elizabeth's sort of warnings about the threats to higher ed, you've said this a little bit, but do you have any more insights on what makes liberal arts education so distinctive?
Yeah, you're right. I have said it, so I'm not going to say it again. But what I'm going to answer that question, Tom, I think more in terms of myself. And again, sort of going back to having been a student here in the 1970s and thinking about the way in which it served me, the way in which it was valuable to me. And I would say that there are really two things I'm going to talk about. Number one, my career trajectory, and number two, my quality of life. Simple thing, you know. I mean, we need to talk about what kinds of lives we're living and enjoying. But a career trajectory. I graduated in 1979, and my first job out of college was teaching English at a great prep school north of Boston called St. John's Preparatory School. And I was 22 years old. I mean, the kids that I was teaching weren't that much younger than I was. And yet, you know, I was in a very competitive selection process, but I'm convinced it was my BC education, my English major, but so much more that made me a candidate that they decided to hire fresh out of college. And so I worked at St. John's Prep for 5 years, then moved on to college admission, was hired here at Boston College as an assistant director in 1984. And, you know, one thing a liberal arts education prepares you to do, I think, is learn new skills. And it was a whole new skill set. In many ways, I was doing something I loved, which was talking about liberal arts education and talking about Boston College and liberal arts education. But it was learning a whole new vernacular in terms of looking at geographic markets and thinking about travel and visiting schools. So all of that, I think the transition was very easy for me because I think I had that skill set that I was able to make that transition quite easily. Then 1990 comes along, and the gentleman who hired me, Charlie Nolan, who went off to become Dean of Admission at Washington University in St. Louis, that left a void. And I was not in the remotest portions of my mind thinking about applying to become director of undergraduate admission until reading season, one great reading season there in 1989, I think it was, buried with files and colleagues in the office on a Saturday, and two of them came to my office and said to me, "Are you thinking about applying?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, we think you should." And we ended up talking for about an hour and a half or so. And they talked about the fact that, you know, you've got the leadership, you've got the integrity, you've got the knowledge of this place. People listen to you. People are going to pay attention when you ask them to do something. You treat people, all these things that they said to me. And that, to me, again, flows from the liberal arts education. It also, if you read my piece in the magazine, there's a economics professor over at Harvard, David Deming, who talked about the fact that fresh out of college, liberal arts graduates, English majors like me, philosophy majors, history majors, they may start slow in terms of compensation, and the scientists and the engineers might score very big in that first job. But there are studies that are being done right now, 30, 40 years out, those liberal arts folks, they catch up. And they catch up because most of them are managers. They're the people that have that ability, that skill to learn new things and to lead people and to communicate effectively with the written word and the spoken word. Those kinds of things, I think, are definitely part of it. So I think it has absolutely affected my career trajectory. I didn't think I could do that director job. And then the VP for enrollment management came up. That was sort of I just had to do that because somebody had left and they needed somebody. And I had that knowledge of admissions and financial aid and enrollment issues, but admissions was really my game. But Father Leahy said, no, we need you to do this. So career trajectory, my liberal arts education came in handy. In terms of quality of life, that I go back to that lifelong learner. I'm somebody who's just, since I graduated, I have a passion for just reading and reading fiction, reading history, reading biography. I love theater. I love cinema because I'm interested in art, and so that brings me a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment in my life to have those kinds of things that, again, all come from the liberal arts education. And for me, literature, when you're reading great literature, it lifts you out of yourself and projects you into other people or other situations. So it's that alone forces you to think and reflect on what's happening, and you learn things from that. So I think that's one thing. I also just finished reading a book, the fourth volume of Robert Carrow's biography of Lyndon Johnson. And, living in the age that we all do, particularly in these political times, I guess I fell victim to the fact that maybe this congressional situation that we're looking at in Washington, this political gridlock where nothing seems to ever get done, I figured this was a sort of a contemporary phenomenon. And then I read this book, late 1950s, early 1960s, and the same gridlock existed over different issues. And it took Johnson to come in and sort of break the gridlock. But I think these kinds of things are beneficial. I'll end on Father Greg Kalsher's great homily at baccalaureate several years ago, where he talked about the value of a liberal arts education making us more fully human. It humanizes you by exposing you to different subjects, different ideas, different ways of looking at it. It makes us more fully human, and that connects to, once again, Father Himes, who used to say, whatever humanizes, divinizes. It brings us closer to God.
Wonderful, John. Wonderful.
So I know, because we shared so many students through the years, that you write tons of recommendations for students going off to graduate school. And you also speak to so many employers about students. What do you say in these calls and in your letters? And how does what you say reflect the value of liberal arts education that these students have had? Mm-hmm.
And so it's a labor of love to write recommendations. And I tell employers, or maybe I could say remind employers, many of them, employers love BC students. Doesn't matter your major, right? Your career is not going to be decided based on what you major in at BC. Exhibit A and Exhibit B. And so I say the applicant has been trained in these ways. Right. Here are some things that happen at Boston College that this applicant has been exposed to make them fulfill their potential. Right. Here are some of the courses they've taken. Here's how I know them from the classroom. And I talk about those attributes earlier. Curiosity, grit, tenacity, receives criticism very well, open to growth, high performing, low maintenance, right? The perfect combo, right? Curious. They'll stay late on an assignment and a project. They'll know when you're stressed, and they'll stay with you until it's done. The project's done. I mean, these are all around well-rounded, good, decent people who will contribute to the culture of the organization. They'll be on the pro bono committee because we focus on service. We tell students your education is not for you. And then they call me back often and say, can you send me another one of these? And so it's, again, mutually reinforcing, right? And it keeps happening. Like, the admission department's judgment, the work on the campus, who you become here by hard work, because these conversations are hard work. You got to let go of some things to become a better person. We have to all improve, and that's hard work, right? On a daily basis, we got to pray. We got to work like it's up to us and pray like it's up to God, like the Jesuits teach us. And so it's a joy to recommend BC students. I know we want to thank all of you for coming here, all of your presence, especially our students who we're so dedicated to. And really, you know, in leaving, you're wrestling and grappling with life and all the challenges of growing up in your gen. What you read matters. Who you hang out with matters, you know. How you study matters. It will matter to many people. How you pray matters. You know, so please remember those things. And I also want to say, in May, Forbes magazine came out with a ranking. And I know we believe more in mission than rank. If you do mission well, rank will take care of itself. But Forbes declared Boston College the #1 private university for job-prepared graduates. And I have been seeing that, you know, the professors have been seeing that in the classroom for years. And their metrics can lag the reality. But when that came out, and what I want to say tonight is we owe John Mahoney a debt of gratitude.
Angie, Tom.